It might be, and I understand that, the timing here is not divorced from the political reality that we're about to see a new administration, one that's promised some extremely disruptive economic policies, and the Fed, I'm sure they're not planning on it, but they can't ignore it. And so they need to be,
Hmm. relatively
relatively cautious in their path forward, knowing that the most important thing for effective policy is both certainty and the room to maneuver. So they wouldn't want to, cut themselves off from being able to, respond to price increases that come from tariffs next year.
There were a lot of folks concerned. I think Elizabeth Warren might be one of them, if I can drop a name in here, that this job market would be in much weaker shape right now because of the length of time the Fed waited to start cutting interest rates. Do you feel that way now? Is this a surprise to you to see the job market in this state? And where is it 6 months from now?
Well, it's certainly not where it was 6 months ago or 12 months
Yeah.
ago. I mean, we are at I think moderate was what was used with your last correspondent. I mean, moderate, stable, but not thriving. We're in a decent spot to cut rates. We're seeing everything is kind of at pace, but not necessarily successful. And if you can look at hires over the past 3 years, you will see that there are a lot of people who'll tell you that we might not be falling, but we are not rising. And we are not incorporating young workers into the labor market as fast as we should. We're not seeing hires pick up to the rate that we would like. I mean, we're not in a recession, but the mark has to be higher than that for the US economy.
Hmm. Well, when we consider the next Trump administration and across the board tariffs, for instance, that have been proposed, along with extending tax cuts from 2017, there is a big question about where we're going to be when it comes to inflation and how these wages might keep up. How does that layer concern you or not about the year ahead?
I mean, what I plan for most is the tax cut. It is the most probable and likely event of all the policies that that candidate Trump said on the campaign trail. I think that they would like to extend the 2017 tax cuts. It's going to cost somewhere between $4 and $5 trillion over a 10-year period to do so. This is on the heels of about $8.5 trillion of tax cuts that we've pursued over the last 23 years. And we know that if we are running trillion-dollar deficits and cutting our revenues by $4 to $5 trillion, that this will push up the borrowing cost. The Congressional Budget Office said just this week that it will have no positive effect on the economy because it is going to be deficit financed. I think that is what the
Hmm.
Fed probably has to plan for as the most likely outcome. I mean, deportation
Mhm.
and tariffs, I do wonder how much of it is bluster, how much of it is, going in with like a lion and coming out like a lamb, throwing up your hands and saying, well, they wouldn't let me do it. I think Congress is committed to passing a significant tax cut. I don't know how much other policy supported, by Congress or is feasible and is not just a campaign promise.
How's the Fed handle this? How do you make plans? How do you forecast in a world where you're not sure if there will be tariffs, what their impact will be, or what might follow the extension of these tax cuts, assuming that's going to happen with a Republican majority? Jay Powell's waking up in the morning wondering if there's going to be a shadow Fed chair on top of it. What's his life and what's his job going to be like in the new year?
I will say I find he must have incredible self-control because he is a very stable presence, no matter what, especially in the press conferences, no matter what pressures he's under. So I appreciate, coolness under pressure from him. I think that's worth saying. So we don't necessarily say it enough. He's not someone who I would consider being
Hmm.
associated with bluster. But the Fed doesn't really love uncertainty, and economists don't like it either.
Right.
And playing around with something like tariffs when we are in an era of free trade that has helped keep prices low in the US on the heels of a bad inflation spike, I don't think anybody would want that scenario if you are concerned about stability in the US economy. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that they have to just, they've got to stick to their essentials, forecast what they know, consider how price increases can be absorbed. There's lots of, I mean, I think what I wonder about and what I wonder if the Fed wonders about is the secondary effects of tariffs, right? We have the tools to say you increase tariffs by this much, it's on these countries, they import these goods. We can throw it into a spreadsheet and figure out where prices are going to rise. The last round of tariffs we
Hmm.
had focused on washing machines and not dryers. And yet, studies of the effect of those tariffs show that prices increased just as much for dryers, because it's not just the effect of the tariff, but how much room that gives companies to maneuver in being creative and ambitious with price increases. And I assume that what the Fed is more worried about are not the effect of prices from tariffs that they can predict, but the effect of prices from the room that tariffs gives companies to take advantage of the situation and raise prices. That's much harder to predict, but it could be much larger.